Today we're going to take a look at creating this procedural small hill or mountain. And I could have probably made these textures look a little bit better, but that's not really what this tutorial is about. This tutorial is all about displacing this plane here to make it look like a mountain or hill, and then masking these textures. To start off, let's go ahead and delete this default cube and bring in a plane, and then go ahead and tab into edit mode and hit W or right click depending on your setup to bring up this sub menu. Going to click on subdivide, come down here to where it says subdivide and change the number of cuts to 50. Then tab out of edit mode, and we're going to change to the cycles render engine because we're going to be doing some displacement here. Let's change the device to GPU compute, and then come down here to the material properties and click new, and let's call this hill. Scroll down to where it says settings. We're going to change the displacement from bump only to displacement and bump. Let's go ahead and split our screen here. I'm going to change the left to the shader editor and hit N to get rid of that shelf. I'm going to start with a texture coordinate node and just place it here and make sure we're coming out of the generated output. I'm going to bring in a separate XYZ node and just put that right after there. Then bring in an RGB Curves node and place that right after here. And then a displacement node and put that right after here as well. But we're going to change this input here into height instead of normal that it's kind of set up as a default. Move this BSDF out of the way, and I'm going to plug displacement into displacement on our material output as well. We can see now it's displacing our plane. So then if we come over here to the RGB Curves graph, we can actually change this around, get some pretty interesting custom shapes. Anything we put on here, any points, are kind of mimicked in this shape right here. So it's pretty fun to play around with. I suggest you try that out. But I'm just going to reset this curve and change it back to normal there. And I'm going to duplicate it and put it right here. We're going to plug Y into that color as well. And we're going to mix these two together with a mix RGB. And it's just kind of set up there automatically. That shortcut, by the way, is Control-Shift, right-click on a node, and drag it to another node, and it'll set up a mix for you. We're going to set this to multiply and change the factor to 1. Now we can see we've kind of got some more interesting displacement happening there from one side to the other. And it's basically these two lines in both the X and the Y axis. So let's start creating our base hill shape here. I'm going to just set this up as close as I can to my first idea I had there. I'm going to show you what that is, but feel free to do whatever you want. So I'm going to put this point right here, put this point right around here, this point right around here, this point around here, and this point around here, and then just drag this point all the way to the bottom there. And then I'm going to do something to this point here, which is you just select that point and you hit this drop down arrow here, and you change this from auto handle, which is what it's set at normally, to a vector handle. And that just makes this a bit more of a tip here. I'm going to do the same thing to this one right here, change it to vector handle. So then let's come down to the second RGB curves that's plugged into this Y output of that separated XYZ, and let's change those points. So I'm going to set this up, like I said, just to how I had it before, but feel free and do whatever you want. Play around with this, you can get some interesting stuff. So point there, point there, point there, point there, point there, point there, another point there, and a point around here, and then just drag this down. We're going to change this one to a vector handle, this one to a vector handle, and I guess this one here is also a vector handle. I'm just going to move it out here a little bit. So we can kind of see some interesting mountainous texture taking shape there already, but we're going to do some things similar we did to the last one where we displace it with some noise here as well. So let's go ahead and add in a noise texture and just place it on the vector line, and we can see it's too much influence there, so we need to back it off. Let's add in a mix RGB to do that and place it right after this noise texture and plug the generated output into color 2. And now we can control how much this noise influences our final texture there. So, feel free and set this whatever you want. I think I had this at like 0.833 or something like that. Yeah, looks pretty good. And now we're going to duplicate this noise texture and this mix texture because we want to create some finer details there as well. And this noise texture, let's bump the scale up to something higher to 60, let's say, we need to back it off a little bit as well. So I'm going to put this factor at quite high, just kind of drag it across and see what happens. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm going to set it at 0.98. I think that looks pretty good there. And let's make sure we're plugged this generated into color 2 as well. We lost some of that first noise there. That looks a bit better. So I suggest you play around with the shape of the mountain before you move on to this next part, because it's going to load a lot slower once you add some textures in here. But I'm going to go ahead and show you what I did here. I'm going to do something similar to the last video where I'm going to create 3 of these principled BSDFs, and I'm going to change this bottom one to that same grass texture that I did last time there, which is a polygon texture. Oops. It's and there we go. That one's set up. I'm going to do a clay texture for this one here. Ground clay. And for this top one, I'm going to do that same rock texture that I got from textures.com. So let's check that out. So next I'm going to bring in 2 mix shaders and 2 color ramps, and those are just in preparation to create some masks to mix these textures together. So the first color ramp here, I'm just going to have this Z from the separate XYZ, just a Z output there, plugged into that color ramp. And then the second color ramp, I'm going to have this mix RGB multiply plugged into that second one there, just like that. Let's come over to this first color ramp here and see what it's doing. You can see at the default value it's just, you know, kind of gray there, so we want to tweak these values and see if we can get some range in here. That's basically my ideas when I'm playing around with this. I just want to be able to come up with a map that has some values that I can make the textures more interesting. So if we pull the black up there, we can see some black spots. I'm going to pull the white down here and get a bit more black there as well. Looks pretty good. I'm going to set these values here to 0.5 and this top one here to pretty close to that second one, so like, you know, 0.5 something. That looks pretty good there. Yeah, I like that right there. 0.523 is that second one. So let's check out the second color ramp here. Just right click on that one, or it's Control Shift left click, pardon me, to view that one there. And then we can see it's kind of already got a map where it's, you know, the bottom and the top is a separation point there. So I'm just going to drag these in and just figure out where I want that to be. Looks like I'm going to have to keep it quite low there, and I'm going to bring the white down as well. So this black I've got at let's do 0.41, and then this white, let's bring this down to 0.127. Yeah, that looks pretty good there. I'm happy with that. Then we're going to plug the color output from this first color ramp into the factor of that first mix shader, and the color output from the second ramp into the factor of that second mix shader. Then we're going to plug this grass into the middle socket of this first mix shader and the clay into the second socket there. And this is the one that's kind of spotted around the mountain there. Let's just see what that looks like really quickly. So we can see our clay and grass. Let's go ahead and make these textures a little smaller too while we're over here. Let's change these all to 10. It'll look a little bit better. We'll see some tiling, but we could break that up if we wanted. I'm just not going to spend time on that in this tutorial. Let's change this rock texture in preparation, even though we can't see it yet. Let's run this mix shader output into the second socket of that second mix shader, and then we're going to bring this rock and plug this into the bottom socket of that mix shader, just like this. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it looks a little, I don't know, it looks kind of small when you're looking at it like this. It's just like one texture. Looks like a little rock. So I'm going to do one more thing here, and this is just going to make it a little bit more complicating. I'm just going to duplicate this mix shader and just bring it up here, and that's actually good right there. And I'm going to plug this clay into the bottom there, and I'm going to make a mask for right here, and it's going to be a really simple one just with two nodes. It's going to be a texture coordinate and a color ramp. So let's bring those in and just put them right here. We're going to be coming out of the normal output of this right here. Plug that into the color ramp there. Let's look what the color ramp's doing. So here we just have a separation between the normals, so that the different axes are going to be different shades of gray. It's just a kind of a simple way to separate two different colors there. So I'm just going to use this mask here and bring these values down quite a lot. Maybe something like that there. The black is going to be our rock, so I want it to be mostly rock. Let's plug this in here, and let's view this last mix shader here again. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to come over here to the modifiers panel and add on a subdivision surface modifier. Let's go ahead and crank this up to 3. It's going to make it look better. You can even crank it higher if you want, but I think 3 is pretty good. So there wasn't quite enough rock for me there, so I cranked this color ramp here that's coming out of the normal. The black is at 0.395 and the white is at 0.45. That looks a little bit better. There's a little bit of clay on the side there. Looks interesting enough. I'm happy with this. So let's look at a few other shapes our mountains could take. I'm just going to come over here to the first couple nodes right after this texture coordinate, these noise and these mixes here. Let's try turning down this second mix here to something like 0.65. Let's see what that looks like. So now we've got more interesting dynamic range there. We don't want to turn down this mix too much. You can see what happens if I turn this down to like 0.9 for instance. It just gets way too crazy, and I mean, if you want that look, that's what you want to go for, but it just doesn't look as realistic anyways. It looks a little bit too bumpy, so I like to keep this pretty high. Maybe let's turn it down to 0.97 though. That's a little bit more extreme. Let's bump this up to something like 120 instead. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so now that that's a little higher, I actually want to turn this influence down as well. Let's go to 0.99 and see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. It's still a little extreme in some places, but you could tweak that if you wanted. Let's change this factor, or pardon me, this scale here as well to 10 and see what that does. Yeah, interesting. Let's turn this up to 0.75. Cool. Anyway, hope you can see what I was doing there and you were able to follow along, and thanks a lot for watching.